Gonzo Education by Gregory Brandt. Chapter 3. Working Homeless. I lived out of my truck when I got back to San Antonio, usually parking it behind a church after it got dark. One of the most stressful things you can do when you're living in a car is to drive around trying to find somewhere to park, especially when you're drunk. Everybody needs somewhere to go back to at night, a spot. It could be an empty parking lot, a friend's backyard, or $1 million mansion. The mind needs a place to relax. I've always felt safe at churches, and you avoid cops and criminals. They're the ones you got to look out for, them and snitches. My sunburn got better within a week, and 1999 was a mild summer by Texas standards. I was homeless and unemployed, staying up all night smoking weed with my friends and scrounging up enough pocket money for gas and cigarettes. I slept in the bed of my truck, stared at the stars, peeled dead skin off my back, and listened to Buddy Holly on the AM oldies station on my truck's factory radio. For the first part of summer, I stole change from Michael's car and ate food I took from Mom's fridge when Guy wasn't home. A few days after the 4th of July, I got a day job working at an upscale hamburger joint, Chester's Hamburgers. Benny also helped me get a second gig washing dishes at a Little Caesars pizza place where he worked. I was sleeping in my truck behind a church, but at least I had two jobs. Each job was totally different with two unlike sets of employees on opposite sides of the social spectrum. The people at Little Caesars were cool, laid back, and easy to get along with. They worked to pay their bills. They worked because they had to. The kids at Chester's were aloof, stuck up, and treated individuals they considered inferior without respect. They worked because their parents suggested it or it looked good on a college application. I hated working at Chester's, but Little Caesars had an environment I could relate to. The employees weren't working summer jobs like the kids at Chester's referred to them as. It was the middle of summer, but the people at Little Caesars wouldn't have called it a summer job. My shift at Chester's was from 8 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. When I was done flipping burgers, I had a short break before I had to be at Little Caesars. I was their only dishwasher, so my evening was spent scrubbing dough off pizza pans. We'd wrap things up around midnight, and me, Benny, and the crew would head over to the manager's house to drink Bud Light, smoke swag blunts, and watch late night MTV. If I was too drunk to drive, I'd usually sleep in my truck parked in the front of the manager's house. But most nights, I'd leave before the sun came up and drive to my favorite church parking lot. Waking up at sunrise and going to work at Chester's pretty much sucked, and I'm the first to admit that I didn't have a positive attitude towards my more fortunate coworkers. I usually had been drinking all night, and even though I didn't get hangovers back then, waking up covered in dirt, sweat, and mosquito bites in a rusty pickup truck would have put anyone in a bad mood. The worst part about it was not shitting or showering before I had to be cheerful at a greasy hamburger joint with people who treated me like shit. I wasn't happy, but I knew employment was the only way out. Working yourself out of homelessness is the most common way to beat it. According to the New York City census that was published on the website for the Coalition for the Homeless in 2010, about 44% of homeless in the US have full time jobs. The kids at Chester's knew each other from Churchill High School, one of the wealthiest public schools in town. I'm pretty sure they didn't have many urgent bills to pay. They acted like I was invading their turf. With one look at my cheap shoes and rusty truck, they slapped a label on me. Labels prevent you from getting to know someone. You know the feeling you get when you walk in the room after a group of people have just been talking about you? I had that feeling every day at Chester's. The only part of my shift I enjoyed was when I went outside to wash the windows and doors with old newspapers. I'd take my time and read all the headlines while I polished the glass. It was the only time I didn't feel their stares and jokes. I've had over 100 jobs in my life, and most I left on my own recognizance. But Chester's was one of the few places that I actually got fired from. I was upset when they told me, but it wasn't because I got fired. I hated that job. I was pissed because they fired me because I didn't fit in. Now that hurt my ego. It was much better with the crew at Little Caesars. They were from working class backgrounds and didn't drive cars their parents bought them. They didn't analyze my cheap shoes like the kids at Chester's. I'd hang out with the Little Caesars gang almost every night. We had food fights with pizza toppings, gave our friends free pizza, and smoked pot and drank beer in the walk-in freezer. By the time September came, I had saved up enough money for an apartment. I was ready to get out of my truck, but I still needed a cosigner. This took some persuading, but I managed to convince mom to convince her husband, Guy, to let her co-sign for me to get an apartment. I promised her I'd have the rent paid on time every month, but I knew it was going to be tough. The apartment was a few streets down from where Michael and I grew up. It was my first real place, but I never got comfortable. It felt like I was house sitting. Everyone I knew said it'd be a matter of time before I got kicked out. I was like, I didn't deserve it. And my friends at the time only reinforced the idea. Knowing you, they'd say. I enjoyed entertaining company at my new place. It felt like I did in Jonathan's garage. Michael had moved into our sister's duplex in Austin, but he'd still make the drive to San Antonio a couple times a week to stay at my place. We had our 20th birthday party there. I was drunk, high on cocaine, and tripping on acid all at the same time. The night started off slow with just a few losers hanging out in my living room, but then loads of people started to show up, attractive blonde girls, friends with big bags of weed, and even a small motorcycle gang that lived down the street from mom's house. My job at Little Caesars wasn't enough to cover rent, so Benny and I got a morning gig delivering newspapers in my truck. We were horrible carriers who broke windows, knocked over flower pots, and sent papers flying through wind chimes. You lose common sense delivering the newspaper with your best friend, but some of the best times I ever had was throwing papers with Benny. One Saturday night, my truck was having engine problems, so Benny asked his 80-year-old father to help us roll and deliver the big Sunday paper. We parked his red F-350 truck outside the balcony of my third-story apartment and threw papers over the ledge into the bed. The three of us rolled Sunday papers early in the morning while his dad told us spirited stories about the Great Depression, World War II, and being born during the Woodrow Wilson administration. That individual is the oldest person that I will ever know. Benny Woodrow McGee, the first, was born in 1917. And I'd like to say he was a friend. He was my friend's dad. He had my friend when he was like in his late 60s, and he named his son Benny, also Benny Woodrow McGee. And the reason it's Woodrow is because the first Benny Woodrow McGee was born during the Woodrow Wilson administration in 1917. And I'm a big fan of history. So when I want to put dates in perspective, the World War One was from 1914 to 1918. So I think about my friend Benny Woodrow McGee, who was born in 1917. So that means when he was born, World War One was still happening. And Charles Bukowski is another example. Charles Bukowski, the famous writer, was born in 1920. Charles Bukowski, spent the first part of his life poor, working poor, impoverished, and didn't see success until his later years. So he said he had a greater respect for money after not having it for most of his life. But this is a great book. It's Gonzo Education, written by Gregory Brandt. You can see the reviews on Amazon right now. Everybody that has read this book has loved this book. It's a very short book, only about 260 pages, but it goes over a 15-year period of the writer's life. So I definitely suggest it. It's available at Barnes and Nobles and on Amazon. Gonzo Education by Gregory Brandt. Have a nice day.